There were towns and cities that banned the playing of Rebel Without a Cause. The community standards were such that they felt their community was at risk. And if you show a film to a teenage audience where there's a switchblade fight, they were saying, you're asking for trouble.
Rebel was a shocker because of the sociological implications of kids behaving the way they were in the film. But it goes farther than that. It was just so well conceived, the idea of these kids being that lost and separated from society, making their own society and their own family. When you saw it on the screen, the impact, I thought, was very, very great.
Nick had felt passionate about a discovery that really he was one of the first to make, and that was that the kind of delinquency we were seeing among young people wasn't restricted to what was then called the ghetto. There was a lot of restlessness among middle-class young people who were acting out in ways that one would never expect. And he realized that this was a function of the family, not a function of an economic situation at all. It was their own rage at being raised by people whose values were old-fashioned to them, and at the kind of parenting that young people were experiencing in the wake of World War II. Explanations had to be found, and that this was certainly food for Hollywood.
There was this property at Warner Brothers called Rebel Without a Cause,
which was a book by a psychiatrist named Robert Lindner that had nothing to do with this, but was the day-by-day psychoanalysis, one part of it at least, of a young prisoner.
When Ray went to see Trilling at the studio, Trilling assumed that Ray was going to do the film based on Robert Lindner's book. And Ray said, no, I want to make a film about the normal kid who lives next door who is about to explode. And Trilling said, everybody knows that all delinquents come from poor homes. They come from poverty. These kids go to good schools. These kids have good families. They wouldn't turn to crime. And Ray said, well, I can't explain it. All I can do is tell you what I've read in the newspapers and in magazines and in talking to kids and cops and adults.
And he had found that on Mulholland Drive, there was a tunnel, and that at night, various groups of these kids would dare each other to race through the tunnel at each other. And the first one to pull out of the line of approach was Chicken.
He wrote a 17-page treatment, which he called The Blind Run. The treatment opens up with 3 vignettes, violent vignettes. One is of a boy setting a man on fire and then watching him burn. Another is of, 2 boys beating a girl with a whip. And the third is a blind run. There's 2 cars coming at each other inside a tunnel. And he presented it to Warner Brothers, and then they turned around and called it Rebel Without a Cause and not The Blind Run. And he was very upset about that. Nick Ray's first attempt to get a screenwriter was Clifford Odets. Clifford Odets was a friend of Ray's, and he trusted Odets' instincts as a writer. And the studio said, well, okay, that's fine, but we really have our own writer already, and his name is Leon Uris. He's written Battle Cry. Battle Cry is doing fabulously well. But then he and Uris could not agree on the concept of the film. Uris saw this macro picture. He saw communities at risk rather than individuals. Ray saw the film as a character study. The studio then made a second choice for Ray, again, not his own choice, and that was Irving Shulman. And Shulman came into the project without preconceptions, but somewhere along the way, they had disagreements over the final planetarium sequence. Ray had a feeling that he wanted a sense of classical tragedy about the story, that there should be symbolic qualities to the scenes at the planetarium. Shulman insisted that the planetarium sequence was just a setting. So, okay, now you've got two writers. You haven't gotten along with either one of them. You're now about 4 months into pre-production for the film. You haven't got a finished script. Enter Stuart Stern.
I went to a party at Gene Kelly's, and Nick Ray was a guest.
Ray remembered a film called Teresa, which had been directed by Fred Zinnemann, and Stern had been nominated for an Oscar for his writing in that film. Ray admired the film for the way the characters were portrayed.
Being with Fred, who had a gift for empathizing with people from a different background and getting them to talk and seeing the wealth of story that came out of life, taught me everything that I ever needed as a writer. In looking at what Irving had done, those are not people I would have written, because I think almost everything I've written has been autobiographical. If I can't respond to material, it means it's not for me. And neither was his script. I think it was extremely competent, but it was not, I was nowhere in it. Nick sensed that, knew that, we talked about that. And he said, you've got to write your script, and I've got to make my picture. He had terrible pangs of conscience about himself as a father. And I had terrible fury about myself as a son. And we both knew that that was a stream that we both shared in different ways.
What's the matter with you anyhow?
He's just loaded, honey.
I was talking to Jim.
My mother really was never content with anything, and that there was really nothing Dad could do that could win her, because she could not give him love. He fell into that role of being a placater, idolizing her, adoring her. As he said to me once, my life has been a series of insults.
Oh, she needs him alive and he takes it.
He did put her apron on one night. These things just, they pop out of your own dramatization of what it was like for you.
Don't.
I'm in there like glue in every scene. I'm both Plato and Jim. I had never acted out the way Jim Stark acted out. I had wanted to, but I had had heroes. I don't know what I would have done without a model to cling to. And there were others who used me. And Rebel was like that to me. Plato, in my mind, was the starving orphan.
If only you could have been my dad.
You flipped or something.
Who needed to be sure there would be a father and a mother there that would protect him.
You know what he wanted? What? He tried to make us his family.
And then I felt that Jim, being fatherless, would have the same search. He was searching for his father to stand up.
You better give me something fast.
I think Buzz saw in this new kid what he was, and that this knife fight was a ritual of that. But there had to be a moment where they came clean. And that was my favorite scene that I've ever written.
You know something? I like you. You know that?
Why do we do this?
You gotta do something. Now, don't you?
It's a private moment in time away from his collected adorers who were just as needy as he was, but he couldn't show it. That's the plight of the hero. Peter Pan lives again in Rebel. When we decided that they would run away to a place that was an ideal, they arrive at Neverland, where there was mystery and privacy, but a million doors. And Plato is the Lost Boys. So it's Peter, Wendy, and the Lost Boys. And I said, it's going to be operatic. These are not going to be realistic scenes. And Nick said, well, that's what it is. It's opera when you're that old. And then the idea of rounding it, having the symmetry of an early sequence at the planetarium in which the whole subject of the unimportance of man and of man existing alone and this whole story being about children existing alone and having to find each other. And will the world end at night or at dawn? And I knew right away that it was going to be 24 hours. It would start ending at night, but it would not end until dawn.
Boy, this is going to be one terrific day.
And Nick said, that's really tight.
Because tomorrow you'll be nothing.
He said, that's right. When you're a kid, he said, it can be a whole life that happens in 24 hours. The minute I saw the Griffith Observatory, I knew that it was meant for cosmic viewing.
We'll look into the night sky.
But also that it was the nearest we could get to God. And the building is an echo of the stage house in the Greek amphitheater, in the Theater Dionysus in Athens, where those great playwrights wrote Oedipus and the Aeschylean trilogy and so on. That the sacrifice would be where the great tragedies were staged, on the temple steps. Originally, I had both of them killed. First they nab Plato, and as Jimmy starts toward Plato, they nab him. And they thought it was downbeat. So what do you do?